So if you didn't catch the announcements as the panelists were coming up on the stage, we're looking for your questions. We don't have a specific agenda here other than getting your questions both asked and answered. We've got a couple of us with microphones, so just shoot your hand in the air and we'll come stage by you.
Okay, so I've got a question, first for Rick, but if anybody else has anything to add to it. You talked about setting a baseline with the Haney test, and so I've been doing that and then taking a retest, and you mentioned looking at the phosphorus and potassium to look at that. What are some other things that you would really focus on looking at as a baseline compared to like after 3 years?
Is this for me? I'm sorry. Is this for Rick? Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. I think you look at any testing you're doing and do that baseline, but I like to look at things like inorganic nitrogen versus organic nitrogen. If you're in a high tillage environment, you are more than likely going to be probably a 98% non-organic nitrogen, probably 2% or maybe 0 of organic nitrogen. As your system is shifting through the soil health journey, you should see that do a total flip-flop. You should be almost up to 100%. Well, you'll probably never get quite to 100%, but you should be heavily weighted toward organic nitrogen over inorganic nitrogen. That's one thing. That's an easy one to look at. I like to look at predator to prey. One shot of a pyrethroid can target one species, but it does a lot of harm. I mean, I love Kris's presentation. I could listen to her all day long. But there's so many things that you have to be aware of that are going to come down the road, as I say, an unintended consequence. So when you start to look at those predator to prey relationships, if you're still using a pyrethroid or even a fungicide probably, you're going to see that out of balance. And once you take those away, like neonicotinoids, why in the world they were ever, or why they're even still ever being used, I don't understand, because I've never seen a test that shows they've improved yield by using them. So why are they on there? It's just things like that to just take away. But that Haney test, I really like the Haney test because there are so many things that you look at on that test. Organic carbon. My brain has gone dead at the moment, but we track, I think, about 30 things off of each test. I hope that answered your question.
Thanks for everything you've shared this week with us. My family farm's just north of where Dr. Nichols' family farm was in southwest Minnesota. I think one of the big things that attracts a lot of people to regenerative agriculture is the reduced reliance on inputs and that greater independence, right? But are we talking enough about our dependence on federal crop insurance subsidies and markets that are subsidized as well, like ethanol and biodiesel? Is there any risk that we should be looking at, or are those federal funds going to be available indefinitely?
You want to?
So I think that there are a lot of producers that are in regenerative agriculture. I know, Rick, you don't participate in crop insurance. There are a lot of farmers who are in regenerative agriculture who don't participate in crop insurance. I think, there are a lot of reasons why that exists. But I do think, and especially, for young farmers too, it's very difficult without some of those systems for you to be able to get loans, be able to, continue on and start your operations and those types of things. I think that from my perspective, and one of the things that I'm trying to do, both up in Canada as well as working with some people down here in the US, is we're trying to generate some data. We did a pilot study with the Agriculture Finance Service Corporation up in Canada on looking at comparing soil organic matter based on the way that the work I do up there is measuring it and comparing that to indemnity payments, and and then dividing that into different ecoregions, obviously, as well. But there was a stronger relationship between organic matter and a reduction in indemnity payments, the need for less insurance payment or less loss with what it is that we're looking at. So I think that for a lot of these government programs, if we can work to try and get them changed, I mean, the risk management agency that dictates what crop insurance should be about is supposed to help us to manage risk, and that isn't what they do these days. So it started off helping us to manage risk because they thought that healthier soil would be less risky. But what we've done is designed a system that in creating, in focusing on yield, is become more risky because it is a system that isn't utilizing the soil health in order to be able to address that. So if we could go back to getting these agencies and getting these programs to focus in on some of those things, I think that that could be helpful. I think that, if we try and rely on food companies and consumers to provide us the price supports, I don't think that that's going to work out well enough to our advantage. I think getting consumers to understand what we're doing and having their support is important. And again, as we're trying to, as Roy talked about yesterday, and Rick has talked about as well, with trying to get healthier food that it is that we're growing, I think that that is something that we need to do in partnership with consumers and with food companies and things like that, but not rely on them giving us a premium in order to be able to get that to happen. I think there are other ways in which we can get government support for soil health that could help us and take advantage of some of the things that we're doing from that perspective. I don't know if anybody else wants to add.
I would just comment that it's been a goal of our operation for a number of years to start weaning ourselves from the subsidy system, whether it's the direct payment program or crop insurance, RMA. And I think we can do that long term, but it's not going to be easy because of what Kris mentioned. One of the hardest things is in the finance world, it's very difficult to get operating loans unless you have some sense of a security blanket to ensure them that you're going to remain solvent. So if you can prove to your financer that you're stable without it, which in some cases we've done that, but yet it's very, very difficult to do that long term. I think as they learn more, the RMA, and as we gain knowledge about soil health and all the things that are tied to that, I think that there's going to be more of a willingness to look at it, especially from the RMA perspective. I think, you're starting to see some relaxing of some of the rules about cover cropping and intercropping. So it's just going to take some time. Things don't happen overnight. Look, when we started no-tilling 35, 40 years ago, there's very few people doing it. It was very, very slow, very, very slow to adopt. And now statewide, we're over 50%. So it just takes a long, long time to adjust. And I think over time, things will change.
What kind of bothers me about crop insurance is, so you get crop insurance or whatever you get, the subsidies you get is everybody's got their hand out. So it's the seed companies, it's the fertilizer companies. They all know right away. It's the landlords and whatever, and that's where I'd like to see where if you can prove that you're improving your land, and because we've got one producer out there and he's doing everything wrong and he's probably getting just what we are, and that's really wrong. And I just think that some way, if they could do that, set up something where they'd go by organic matter or whatever, I think that'd really be a great deal. But it's going to be awful hard to budge anybody because you guys know as well as I do, what the RMA does and stuff is ruled by the big people, the corn and the soybeans, the big guys. And so I think it's going to be awful hard to get to budge that.
One other thing I would add too is as we went down this path and have continuing to move further down the regenerative path, there are certain crops that we've grown that aren't insurable, like cereal rye and mentioned cover crops as well. And sometimes if I've tried interseeding or if I've tried different things, when I go to sign up my acres at FSA, they say, well, what's in this field? I say, oh, that's rye and hairy vetch or whatever. And, well, we can't insure that. Well, I know that, but we just move right on to the next map. And so I insure what I can, but I don't worry about the things I can't. And I think having that mindset of wanting to wean yourself off of it when you can financially and when your bank is okay with it, I think that's really nice. My bank went along with it fine because they were seeing that the amount of rye acres I had in for combine, I mean, I had low enough input costs into it. I wasn't out that much, and I have cattle. I could always turn in if I had to, obviously, unless it's gone to seed. But so I think just the mindset of moving down that path, not farming with your hand out, but wanting to make the best decision for your soil and for your operation, just is a good place to start with that.
Yeah, I'd like to add the one last thing I'd like to add is just continue to educate all of the people that are with you on the journey, even your financial institution. When we came to their door and I told them I wasn't going to be taking any insurance, and they demanded that every loan is attached to an insurance policy, and I said, no, I'm not doing that. And they needed to know why, and I explained to them, and they didn't like it the first year. They kind of didn't like it the second year, and then after that, they were like, okay, I see how this is going to work. So we've educated them. They're with us on the journey. I mean, the guy comes out and he hops in the combine with me. He says, what are we doing today? And this is what we're doing, and he is 100% on board along with the company, and I'll be happy to share. My lending institution is Farm Credit. Where I'm from, it's called Farm Credit Mid-America. I'm not sure what it's called here, but it is Farm Credit. So, today may seem like an impossible task, but you'll be, and the same logic goes with your landlords. We educate landlords. They understand what we're doing because that's another avenue people want to use as a scapegoat to not go down this journey because they'll say, well, I'm only signing a 2-year contract. Why would I want to sign a contract that might be taken away from me, and why would I want to do this? Well, once you educate your landlords and explain to them what you're going to do for their soil, how you're going to change their soil, they'll be with you till you decide to do something different. So anyway, a little side note.
I had a question for Bryan Jorgensen. You had a graph from about the last 10 years showing your soil organic matter on your farm fields, and you also talked about how you've learned a lot just watching the prairie ecosystem and how that works. Do you have a similar graph, similar data points from your native pasture land?
No, I don't. That's one thing that I probably should have been paying a lot more attention to in terms of data collection. And so I've always used the native prairie system as a benchmark. And yes, we've taken some soil tests, but we haven't done it judiciously or, year after year like we have on our crop fields. It's actually something that I've set as a new goal is to start benchmarking a lot more of those, actually from a biological standpoint more than anything. I want to see what the native biological community looks like and see where we are in comparison to that. But for me, it's a wonderful benchmark, especially for organic matter. Phosphate levels is another one. The phosphate thing is what drives me crazy. Everybody worries so much about, especially the agronomists of the world, get really, really uptight when phosphate P1 levels get under 20 parts per million. It's like you're going to die. And if you look at our native soils, they're low. They're 3, 4, 5 parts per million. And they're doing just fine. Our croplands, that's what we're averaging right now, is 5 parts per million, and they're doing just fine. So there's a lot to be learned. But I think the next step for me is not so much just from the nutrient standpoint. I'm pretty comfortable with that. I want to see what the biological community looks like on the native side.
This question is for anybody who wants to answer it. There are tons of problems with saline soils here in South Dakota, and just wondering if anybody would like to address strategies for how to deal with those and turn that around.
And we've dealt with that enough, not a lot, but enough. And the first thing we'll do is we'll go in with the forage barley and hay it. And then we'll come in, and I've done once where you come with the forage barley, take the forage barley off, come with the rye. and then I'll put it in grass. These are usually, I had a map I was gonna put on the amount of salinity that's in South Dakota, and it's just amazing how much there is, just unreal how much there is. Not only along the James River, but even west of Fort Pierre and west of the river. And that's how we handle it. We do not farm through it. I mean, we even if it's a 3 or 4 or 5 acres patch, we try to straighten it out. And that's one good reason, when we have cattle, that's why. And that's why we usually, if we hay it, we haul it off and then plant bica. The only time we'll plant rye on our place is in an instance like that, and we don't let it head out. But we just get to try to use the salt up as much as we can, and then get it into grass.
So I'll let the other guys from South Dakota kind of follow up on this a little bit more, but just to kind of give you an idea too, I mean, when we're looking at salinity issues, we have to understand why that problem had occurred and addressing why that problem is occurring, and looking at how we're managing water and improving the way in which we're managing water, because that really is why we're having those issues. And utilizing crops that are going to grow on there, because we need to grow our way out of it. You can't just ignore it. You can't just try and excavate it and remove it. We need to grow our way out of it, and utilizing some plants that are going to be salt tolerant, looking at the barley as an important component of that, but also wanting to make sure that you've got deep rooting plants that are going to be pulling that water back down into the profile and keeping that water going downwards and building up soil structure and porosity and aggregation, so that you are better able to manage the water. And that includes doing some things that are cereal rye, or something that's going to overwinter and be there in the spring, and being able to get that water going down into the soil as opposed to standing there. I used to live up in North Dakota, and doing something like putting in tile drainage is not the solution to this by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, it can cause more problems than it solves, because what it does is it gives you an excuse to keep the same mindset. And we need to change our mindset in how it is that we're managing water to be able to address that. So it isn't just about addressing when you have these saline seeps and where the saline seeps are, but making sure that we're not going to have them anymore.
Yeah, I'm gonna turn the tables a little bit. If you guys get mad at me, I'm sorry. But I would like to ask the Bucklehides, and they're South Aberdeen, and I know they had some salinity issues. And could you guys address that, how you handle that, or I don't know how long you've been working on it, but just kind of let us know. Very good producers, you guys. They're really on a really good start on the soil health.
Thanks, Dan. We started with Kristen Weber and Anthony Bly with the Every Acre Counts and Soil Health and Habitat Program to really pinpoint where the troubled acres were on our farm. We knew, but it really helped quantify it and how much it was and what it was costing us every year. The strategy we're starting to deploy is perennials. So through that program, it's a 5-year program, and we dormant seeded some different grass species and alfalfa mixed in to have some diversity there. And our intent is to have the acres that are really in tough shape go into this program for 5 years, and then reevaluate after year 5 if we want to bring them back into production or not. And Kristen's got some different pictures from some stuff we've been doing, and it's been remarkable. You finally feel good about those acres that you're making a change before it's a crisis, I guess. And we've been told through some different meetings here, you're giving that acre a different job, and psychologically, it's a mindset change. That sometimes you got to treat every acre different instead of farming it end to end like we're all used to doing. And it's been really fun to see, and you're really proud of it. So starting to see some cover and some growth, and starting to see just some more activity on those soils instead of being just barren and white. So I guess it just takes time and progress and patience.
I really appreciate that, because I know there's a lot of people that have that, and so I really appreciate your comment. Thank you.
This question is about CO2 pipelines. and we've been exposed to a fire hose of ideas of how we can sequester carbon. And I guess why as a society and the government and our ethanol plants around a scheme to build these artificial pipelines 2,000 plus miles across all of our country, digging up our soils, whereas we could be utilizing more time and attention toward our farming methods to solve the same issue. And what we end up doing with these carbon dioxide pipelines is create a so-called civil war out here in the countryside. And I know I'm probably editorializing more here than I'm asking a question, but is there anybody on the panel that would want to expand on this issue? And presently, I've got a carbon pipeline that's running north to south called Dakota Access Pipeline, and now it's being proposed 200 feet adjacent to it. They want to run carbon south to north from Iowa up to North Dakota. So I guess I'm going to leave the panel open to discuss that issue.
So, since I got an opinion about just about everything, you know, again, kind of like with the salinity issue is we do have to recognize that we need to grow our way out of this, and that we need to put carbon back into the soil, and that's what it is that we need to be doing. You know, I take this as humorously as it's intended, but part of the reason why we're creating those things is what's called the immediate gratification gene, that I believe is sex-linked and is more male-dominated in the immediate gratification gene that is sex-linked, meaning that women can be immediate gratifiers too, but you need to have, but here's the deal, is you know, the immediate gratification is you see an issue and we're going to solve it as fast as possible and in as gratifying way as possible. And again, we in our hubris think that this is how we're going to fix the problem. We don't recognize all of the problems that causes and how little that actually fixes as far as the amount of CO2 that is in the atmosphere that we can capture through good agriculture and crop management and rangeland management. And so because we see this immediate problem and we want to address it as immediately as possible, and in our hubris, we think we can create a machine or a pipeline or something to be able to do it for us, just like, you know, a pesticide or whatever else. That's what it is. And, you know, kind of going back to things with crop insurance and other things like that, I understand, you know, the big guys out there and money talks and all of those things, but I look around this room and we have power. We have power in numbers, and we need to take that power back and make sure that we're educating people and telling people and spreading this out and gaining more and more power in numbers to get these things to change. It's sad because I think that a lot of that is going to fall apart fast, real fast. And we're going to put these pipelines in and they're not going to do what they say they're going to do, and they're going to cause some additional problems because we're injecting basically super cooled, highly condensed CO2 down into the soil in a place that has never seen CO2 at that concentration and at that temperature ever before. And in our hubris, we think there's nothing down there, and I can tell you there's a lot down there that is living, and I'm a little bit afraid for all of those little microbes. I feel bad for them on a daily basis.
2 words, money and control. That's really what it is. And there's so much of what's going on that on the surface appears to be scientific evidence. I haven't seen anything that would prove to me that any of this craziness is vital to our survival. But I know that what we are doing and what most of you in this room are doing from a soil health perspective is probably the most efficient way to keep things in balance. And Mother Nature is always going to try and keep herself in balance. There's no question about that. As long as we can learn how to live with that in harmony, there ain't a pipeline in the world that's going to change or make that better. And I think we need, it's up to us, a very small percentage of a population base, very small percentage, that has to learn how to communicate that effectively.
They've been threatening us with eminent domain. I'm from down south of Sioux Falls, and of course, down there, our land has not got agricultural value anymore. It's, acreage value. And I've got a friend of mine that they want to go through there, and he told him, okay, 250,000 an acre. Now he said, you refused me, I didn't refuse you. You can't use eminent domain on me.
Okay, we got another question right here in front.
I won't go down the sex ed line here, but I'm the other half with Alex and Dan. We got a piece of ground right by where the main farm is, and I told Alex one time that used to be my best piece of ground, and now it's not. It's got a lot of salt on it. And right away he said, well, what did you do to it, Dad? And I said, we dropped rotation. We went corn, soybeans, and rotation killed us. We're back at it now. We started a year and a half ago with you guys and have learned an immense amount in that short period of time. Anybody that's new to this organization is phenomenal, and you can tap resources from any of them, or the whole team, or any individuals. But one other thing I wanted to ask Rick, maybe Dan too, or Mr. Jorgensen, if you get fully into this thing, you're planting into a mat of rye straw, you're cutting out your herbicides, hopefully fertilizers. You talked about your savings, but you also talk about meeting with your banker and your landlord. What happens to the Y word in there? Do you expect a normal yield compared to neighbors' conventional till, or are you going to see a percentage drop?
I'll take it first. When you move in to the system of total elimination, which may or may not be correct, but let's just stay there for a minute. Total elimination of chemistry, total elimination of tillage, you create a mat that is there year-round. Our fields look like your yard does in the fall. It's dead, and that's what it looks like. So we're armored 24/7, 365. It's armored. When we were maximizing what the farm was doing on an ROI basis is when we were doing what I'm getting ready to say right now. We were 100% no-till, 100% cover crop, and 70% reduction of inputs. We were non-GMO. 70% reduction of inputs, not organic. We were stable. We have I had a stability chart, but I didn't get to it today. Yield variances in corn are less than 8 bushel to the acre. I mean, we were very stable, making great yields. I then get the notion that let's just get crazy and let's go organic with no tillage. Everything dropped 30% yields. And now I've got all this noise back of variation. And I'm not very stable. So, but we're getting better. But now when you couple into the fact that we have hardly any input costs and our output income is higher based on a per bushel basis. Corn, we're selling corn for $12 a bushel and beans for almost 40. So you then can say, okay, I don't need to make that 200, I'd love to make 200 bushel corn at $12, but we don't need to until we can figure out how do we make the system more stable. And I think, listening to Christine or Kris, I'm sorry, and maybe that is your full name, is it?
That's my full name.
Okay, I didn't know that. But listening to Kris and listening to other farmers, and I think we can get a plan that will get us to that next level, and it still may be a reduced amount of yield, but it'll become a more stable environment, a more, what's the word I want? More reliable. How about that? Because I can take you, one of the things I always say about my own presentation is I feel like sometimes it's a little bit too much like candy canes and lollipops, where everybody thinks it's all great, but it's not. And I need to share more of the things that don't work, and I'm going to do that right now. And I attribute this to the timing of when cover crops are planted in the fall. I can take you to a field of beans that averaged in the 70s, an organic field of beans averaged in the 70s, go 3 miles down the road and go to a field of beans that made 10. The field that made 70, the cereal rye or the cover crop, whatever it was a cocktail, was planted in the first week in September. The field that made 10 was planted in the last week of November. That's how critical timing of planting the cover crop is. So I hope I answered your question, but I kind of threw a couple other things in there. But yes, we've taken a yield hit, and it's very noisy again. But we're working on stabilizing.
Can I just make
Yeah.
You know, the one thing, and I'm going to ask Rick, is how much moisture do you get a year?
We get about 34 inches of rainfall a year. That's a lot more than you get here. A lot more.
You know, and then he's warmer. But another thing, and what we do on our farm, and when we do something, we'll do it on we'll take a quarter section or a half section, whatever, and we'll just shut the fertilizer off and make a round. Then go ahead and go back to what you're doing. Let the combine tell you what you're getting. A lot of times, if that field's making 170, we can raise 135 bushel without any fertilizer. But I mean, I think you have to prove yourself, because I don't know about you, as long as we've been no-tilling, we've only been working with covers with limited moisture since 2006. So we're really young in this. These guys, and I applaud you, but they're using their moisture, they're a little bit warmer, they're using that all to their benefit, where we're just a little bit behind here because of the colder temperatures. And so that's and not quite as much rain, but I applaud what you guys are doing, but I don't think we're quite there yet, but we will be, I hope.
Yeah, and I want to stay right there if you don't mind. Dan, he brought up an excellent point. West Central Indiana, on the edge of the prairie, our inherent organic matter is higher than it is here. So I have the fuel in the tank to pull from. I have the fuel in the tank to reproduce and regenerate, mineralize. There's more nutrients probably available. So we have to be realistic about how far you take the extreme. I would be totally pleased if everyone in the room decreased inputs by 50%. Just go 50% reduction, probably maintain, maybe even increase yield, have a lot less risk, a lot less money borrowed, and probably make more money per acre at the end of the day. I mean, if you think about the logistics for me at home, guys raising 260 bushel corn, it takes a lot of trucks, a lot of people, a lot of equipment to move that kind of corn away from the field. Now, I know this may sound like an excuse, but then you come to my world and I look at a realistic corn yield of 130 in my system, and then you're not burning all the fuel, you're not burning up the labor and all these things. All this adds up at the end of the day. So you have to use context every single day. Can we really take everything away in South Dakota? I don't know. Probably not. But you can take a very big portion of it away. I'm meaning the inputs is what I'm talking about.
I'll just say one quick thing and I'll go ahead. You know, the only thing about Rick's comment, if we do that, are they not going to give us their sweatshirts then, the co-ops? Are we not going to get our hooded sweatshirts?
Yeah.
No, you don't,
You mean
by
that
the way.
vacation they send you, the free vacation? Yeah, that didn't cost anything?
Right. Well, we did too, and we're not nearly as far down the path as I'd like to be, but we're moving in that direction. Back to when Rick talked about the Haney soil test, and I mentioned it yesterday too. When I explained that to my landlords and my banker and stuff, and I explained that it's a way of utilizing a soil test that's going to credit you for organic nutrients there, and it's going to allow you to cut back on inputs without sacrificing yield, they looked at me like I was on something. And they were like, well, why doesn't everybody do it? I said, you tell me. I don't know. but I know it's a newer, maybe a relatively new test, I think, but it's, I was nervous the first time it told me to cut my fertilizer by 50% on my corn, and I just did it on, I can't even remember, 40 or 60 acres, and I did it, and it was my best corn, and I was just bouncing up and down the combine. So it's something that I've gone to abiding by. And I would ask Rick, how do you get across all your acres doing all that probing?
With the Haney? Yeah. Okay. I'll tell you how we do our format. What I like to do is I take a look at the farm, and let's say we've got a block of fields right over here that's 500 acres. And that 500 acres is fairly consistent, topography, fertility, everything's pretty much normal or within a reasonable range. I'll pick a field in that 500 acres to be the representation. And what we do is we pick 3 parts in the field: the least productive, highest productive, and a average production part of the field. And then I want to pull 3 of these tests in the season, which is kind of difficult. 2's fairly doable. The third one's hard because the crop's growing when you do the third one. But I want to see then what is happening. Are the microbes reacting to the spring better? And this goes back to what Kris was talking about with her fist, and the timing of when the microbes are active and when you're going to do things that may interrupt their cycle of work. She explained it very well. If you do tillage and you wipe them out, all they're doing is rebuilding their homes. They're not doing anything toward building soil health. So I want to know, are the microbes doing their functions in the spring, in the summer, or in the fall? And what does it look like when you compare different rotations of cash crops, and then what came before that cash crop? What cover crop was it? I mean, it's a tremendous amount of paperwork if you really want to log everything you do. And I have an app called Evernote, and Evernote is a daily journal. And the reason why I like Evernote is you can take a picture and upload the picture and then add text to the picture. So it's a great way to mark what you were doing in that day, and also with the organic certification, I need to take pictures of seed tags and how we're doing things to prove that we were being organic. But that's how we do the tests, because they're very expensive. And I also do PLFA and Solvita, and there's another, is there a nutrient, what's?
T&D? Do you do the T&D?
Yeah, that's the one I do not do.
Okay, you don't do total nutrient digestion, is the T&D.
And I need to probably start doing that.
Yeah.
Explain what that is.
T&D, total nutrient digestion. So, what you were saying about phosphorus, and that the phosphorus in our native soil is really low. Well, that's the Bray's extractable phosphorus or the Olsen extractable phosphorus, depending on the test that is used to do that. That is that amount of inorganic phosphorus, phosphate phosphorus that you have in the soil, that that was the plant available phosphorus, because that was the only phosphorus that we thought the plants could take up. Yeah. We know now, as I was saying about, how all of these spectrums of different types of organic nutrients are available to the plants, either the microbes helping to make them available to the plants, or the plants being able to absorb the organic forms themselves, again, even absorbing the bacteria and harvesting those nutrients from the bacteria itself. So I think there are a lot of these things where, again, I like the T&D because as a scientist, it's more about, okay, I'll compare what's really there and what the microbes can do to get that to be available. And with the Haney test, they do a number of different extractions. They'll do a water extraction and a weak acid extraction to try and mimic what the roots could pull out from the soil. And they'll look at that those numbers compared to respiration, and give you an idea of what the microbes could help to make more available too. So they'll talk about as sort of potentially mineralizable nutrient concentrations. And that kind of leads into the spectrum of the T&D, or the total nutrient digestion, which is usually a really strong acid digestion and breakdown of the soil. but somewhere between the Haney weak acid extraction and the T&D strong acid extraction is what the microbes can do as far as being able to get access to those nutrients.
Can we get that, can we ask for that test from any lab that?
Most labs will, so like I know Regen Ag does, and I know that Ward Labs does. Not every lab will do the total nutrient digestion. So, you know, it is something that you have to ask for, and sometimes the lab will do that, but you specifically have to ask for it because they'll have on their suite of things that they'll do is just kind of the normal things that they'll do. So asking the questions of the laboratories that you're getting analyses done, and that goes to the biological analyses as well. How are they doing this? What is this information? What is not? What don't I know? Because again, the fatty acid, the PLFA, those are just broad strokes of groups of organisms. They're not identifying specific ones. It's just a count of what fits into that group. And all of the, as a microbiologist, every single test that is out there to measure microbial communities, including DNA testing, has issues. It's not perfect. And so you doing comparisons and tracking and having your baseline data and all of those is a really important thing, because what you're looking at is trends more so than absolute numbers. So I think that's what I want to say about that.
On the topic of Haney tests, I had a gentleman that maybe didn't want the microphone in his hand, so I'll ask his question. Many of you speakers have presented data that you've either greatly reduced or even completely eliminated phosphorus and potassium applications, courtesy of a long-term diverse rotation with cover crops. Is it safe? Can or should a person move ahead without the P&K inputs, without the Haney test?
You know, real quick, I'm going to answer that because we do the Haney test once in a while, not that often. And, you know, we know how many, you know, we've got like 1,000 or 1,100 parts per million of phosphorus. It's the organic phosphorus in the top 24 inches. And we've cut our phosphorus levels in half in the last 7 or 8 years. We're working into this slow. We want to make sure it works. We've done a lot of stuff where we haven't used any phosphorus, or we haven't any drop in yield. So we're working on that. So I'll pass the mic on, but that's just what we're doing.
Well, my opinion would be to continue to do the Haney test. Now, it is the format I laid out is very expensive, but we've got a lot of acres to cover. So maybe your frequency is not as often as I laid out, but I would still be doing some kind of a check on it just to make sure your system is not crashing, because if it's crashing, it's going to take years to bring back.
Yeah, biology doesn't provide an instantaneous result to things. It can be a little bit of a slow process. So the question that I would have back to this person is, I would be, where are you on your regenerative path when you're making that decision? If you are at the very beginning and you have been highly conventional up until this point and a high input type of a system, I wouldn't look at cutting back hardly at all. Now, you know, even without the Haney test, I think that there is plenty of wiggle room, especially in these agroecosystems where we've been adding nutrients for a long time, and we get nutrients coming in. A lot of things we don't talk about, or nutrients are coming in via atmospheric deposition and those types of things that we're getting. So I think that, you know, when people would ask me about that, one of the things that I would say is that you could probably cut back 20%, and it really isn't going to hurt your yield that much. And it's going to be what you would normally see, or what you normally would absorb in your thought about yield anyway, because farming yields go like this. They're always going to go like this. You got good years and you got bad years. And what we're saying in regenerative agriculture is we're not going to eliminate the bad years. They're still going to happen. But what we want to do is, instead of it going like this, it's going to be more normalized, and your average can get to be higher. So what we want to do is, again, you could cut back by probably 20% and not really see an impact in that you wouldn't already be prepared to economically absorb. What I would do with that, though, is I wouldn't cut back 20% this year and 20% next year and 20% the year after that. Is I'd cut back 20% and then I'd wait at least 2 years, see what's happening, and at the end of that, make an assessment as to if you could cut back again, and there you may be able to cut back more like 30%. The other thing, and when we're talking about cutting back, is it also depends on when you are applying your nutrients. So I sort of alluded to this, when the plant has its highest nutrient demand, is if I'm applying nutrients during that period of time, if I'm doing that with Y drops or whatever it is that I am adding some of those nutrients when the plant has its highest demand, that's where I would cut back the least. So when I'm talking about cutting back 20%, it depends on what your fertility program is as well. So if you have any type of split application, you're going to want to split the way you're cutting back that 20% differently. If you're adding a lot of starter and you haven't been putting cover crops into your rotation and into your system yet, you may want to not cut back so much initially with some of your starter. But certainly if you're doing some fall applied stuff, that's where you'd want to maybe cut back more. So again, when I'm saying 20%, it's not equal at each time that you're adding fertilizer. Thinking about when it's going to stay in the soil and be more available for a longer period of time, and when that fits with the plant's physiological need. And again, at the very beginning, where are you at on the path?
Do you know what plants you could grow to cycle phosphorus? I know buckwheat's one. Is there many others?
Well, buckwheat is one. Buckwheat does a really good job of being able to pull up phosphorus. Being able to utilize some legumes in the system, what I had talked about with the whole nitrogen fixation and needing to have some excess phosphorus as far as that's concerned. So doing some things with some legumes in the rotation. Now, legumes in the rotation, soybeans. Part of those are two very different things. And I know soybeans are a legume and we all kind of like them, but I tell people all the time, if you were to list all of the legumes that you could possibly grow and line them up on the wall and put a blindfold on and spin yourself around and have somebody point you to the wall, you could throw a dart and hit anything that would be better than soybeans as far as nutrient and water conversion ratios. It's again, and as far as protein production, it's not good as far as that conversion ratio is concerned. So again, when we're talking about legumes to help with phosphorus, soybeans is not going to be your legume to help you with phosphorus.
Sure. Yeah. I was going to say, because I know watching our soils, when we did more beans, we did notice a decrease in phosphorus. So we started applying phosphorus when we used it. We don't use phosphorus anymore on any of our stuff. I started with going from 7 gallons in furrow of 1034, 5 years ago, to 3 gallons of 100% ortho. And we still do that in corn, but I don't use that on anything else. And then I used to do 120 pounds of mez banded off to the side. I don't do that anymore either. So over the last, and my soil tests have stayed stable with phosphorus. So it's, we do cover crops and stuff, and we've been pursuing the regenerative path for a while now. But so I did start after Green Cover told me that buckwheat is good at cycling it. We added that into some of our cover crop mixes as well. And I also grew buckwheat as a cash crop last year too, so.
I guess the other test too, and Rick talked about this, was sap analysis. But doing some sap analysis and comparing that to your soil tests, especially your Bray's or Olson's P levels, looking at your sap analysis, because that's really telling you what is there and getting into the plant.
Right. Well,
Go ahead, Bryan.
so it was the mid-90s when we started cutting way back on MAP or DAP, surface applied. Well, first of all, chemically, that's a crazy thing to do anyway in high pH soils, because it's going to be immediately tied right back up into the system. You know, it's calcium phosphate. It's just going to adhere. It's a very strong double plus, so it's just going to whammo right back up. And the only thing that's going to release that is time and biology. But so it's a really inefficient way to build phosphate levels in the first place. But what we started doing is just small amounts of Ortho P in the furrow. But I think the key thing is we were also adding some biology and some enzyme catalysts to help feed the biological system that we already had. So at the same time that we were ramping down our nutrients, we were also trying to ramp up our biology. And over the course of time, that's I think why we didn't suffer any kind of yield loss when we made those transitions.
You know, we plant our sunflowers on corn stalks, and we have for a long time, and that's only been going on for like 16 years or so. So a guy thinks it's 95% of the sunflowers are on corn stalks, but this is a question for you guys. So Dave Frenson, the fertilizer guy from NDSU, he says when you plant corn, you plant flowers, you don't need any phosphorus on your flowers because they're both mycorrhizae, and they'll live off what the corn, and they'll be friends, and you don't know it. And he's got about 10 years and only 1 year that there was a negative by not doing that. And I just want your guys' take. Is that what's your thoughts on like a sunflower, corn, or whatever? I mean, is that way off base, or what's your thought?
It's not, yeah, and that goes back to the legume too. The legume's going to be more effective at helping to cycle phosphorus if it is mixed with a grass, to be able to do that. And you want to take advantage of that relationship of trading those nutrients. And the same thing is true for sunflowers. They're very highly mycorrhizal. They're very good at doing that. They don't like to do it just on their own though. It's funny because it's kind of like, if they're there together, they do it very well. If they're not there together, they don't do it very well. So, you know, if you're just going to do, again, one crop by itself, a legume crop or buckwheat are going to be what I would say for phosphorus cycling over sunflowers. But if you put sunflowers with a hog, like corn, they're going to work together.
Yeah, I really think that's the future here, is co-mingling the cash crops. We've been doing it for a couple of years now. Yellow peas and wheat, peas and barley, peas and rye. Depending on what your end game is, if you have a dairy or a feedlot that'll take them as co-mingled, then you just deliver them as such. Otherwise, you get a cleaning system and you separate the two out. You sell the peas over there and the wheat over here. I'm gonna try this year milo and soybeans together. I think those two will work well together. And I think you could even harvest the two together and separate at the end of the day. So yes, I think it's going to be another way to just add more diversity, start looking at cash crop co-mingling.
Rick, I heard you one time on a video. Did you ever end up planting beans and corn together and combining with this?
I did not.
Okay.
Well, I wanted to do that. I thought I had some short-statured corn lined up, and I couldn't get my hands on it. We were going to harvest with the grain table, the beans and the corn at the same time. Again, I think that would work. I think milo and soybeans will definitely work.
Soybeans will work. So kind of the corn and beans, my dad tried to do that with planting a strip of corn, planting a strip of beans, alternating that throughout the field. It worked okay. It wasn't the best yields, but it worked okay. I think that one of the things too is I've seen, and there's a guy up in Canada who started doing this, and over in Ontario, and I think there's a sweet spot as far as the size of the planter, the number of rows. So either, you know, the short stature corn, but also sort of trying to figure out a sweet spot as far as the number of rows. And so I think for what my dad did, it was too few rows. So you didn't see the benefit that you could see. But that's something, again, where it becomes a little bit more difficult because unlike the milo and beans, it's hard to harvest corn and beans at the same time. And hard to harvest them kind of together equipment wise, whereas it's a little bit easier from the milo bean type of combination. So those are the things that we need to be thinking about. But again, thinking about to young people, these are some engineering problems. And if you've got a kid who, you know, doesn't want to farm, but is interested in agriculture, there's a lot of ag engineering types of things that as we go into regenerative, that we can help to build and design and work with. I mean, John Deere did not invent the no-till drill. You know, we got to think about this. You guys did these things, and you've got kids out there that would be really happy to do some really interesting engineering.
I talked with a restaurant owner this morning for a while, and he made a really good comment. He wants to start directly marketing a lot of the produce and the meat that he gets from South Dakota, and he's well down that path. He has 3 restaurants in Sioux Falls, and he was talking to me, and he was saying, one thing to Kris's point here is that's so neat is everybody in this room, first of all, I got to say, this is the most engaged crowd I think I've ever spoken to. So applause to you for that. It's a lot of fun for us to speak to you, and you're so engaged. But one thing he mentioned that was so interesting I'd never thought of before was the community above ground. And I mean, like relational community, working with each other. And Kris mentioned your kids, if they don't want to be farming, maybe they've got another trade that they could add to the operation. That's great to think of, and also as neighbors to work together, and how we rely on each other makes us all more resilient. Just like the symbiotic relationships in our gut or under the soil makes us all more resilient to weather the hard times when we work together as producers and as a community. So I think it's awesome to see this size group and everybody coming for common good.
If I can just add really quick to this, because I want to go back to my whole hatred of the Y word. Our hatred of the Y word has led us to wish evil on our neighbors. I'm going to rain in my place, but not on theirs. And we can't get, I mean, you know, again, farming and ranching was about community, and it was about all of us working together. The granges that existed don't really exist anymore. How it is that we're working together in being able to do this. And we can't let that Y word impede us from working together and wishing the best on everyone in our community.
I've got a question going back to the Neonic comment. The coalition ran a test this year, untreated seed, treated seed, no significant difference. Would Neonics be more likely to work in degraded soil than in healthy soil?
Yes, I think so. Okay. I think that it's and this was one of the things kind of leading in that direction of back, well, almost 20 years ago when I was working with Gabe. And I said to him, I said, you know, part of the issue that we're running into is, and Rick mentioned about mycorrhizae, that we don't have varieties that work with mycorrhizae anymore. Part of the issue that we're running into is that I don't know if some of our modern varieties are going to know how to live in healthy soil. And when it comes to the Neonics, you know, when we're looking at pesticides, usually they have one pathway in which they're using to be able to eliminate the pest. And biology in the soil and healthy soil uses tens of thousands of different types of pathways to do this and mechanisms that can be involved in doing that. And so, again, in a healthy soil, it's not going to make any difference because the stuff's already there doing the job that to help to manage it. So, you know, why does that? But in an unhealthy soil, there's nothing there to be able to do that. So, yeah, I think definitely. Again, I don't really have good data on that, but that would be where I would go.
Got a question, right? Go ahead and just speak her out loud.
Dr. Kris, you were talking earlier about raising alfalfa to kill it. Can you speak more to that, and if there's any producers doing it?
So, yeah, if I wanted to be Rick in an organic no-till situation, which, you know, all of us could want to be Rick on more than one occasion, I think. If I wanted to be Rick, what I would do is I would go out there late in the season, as late in the season as I could, and go out there and graze it to the ground. Have those animals out there. Again, the animals are a tool. We can use them however it is we want to. Graze it as hard as you possibly can. If, you do that late in the season and it still stays warm and we've got an Indian summer and all of that kind of stuff and it starts popping its head back up again, do it again. And, the animals aren't going to necessarily want to do that. But again, we can make our animals do it. And, Rick is talking about epigenetics and keeping the animals. And there's a lot to be said for, we've raised lazy crops and we raise lazy animals. And we need to make the animal work. So go out there as late as you can in the season, graze it off as hard as you possibly can. In the spring, go back out there and graze it off again, as hard as you possibly can. And then plant something that is going to be small grain, that's going to be competition. And you can manage both the small grain and the alfalfa. So you're basically having a year. I think of it as kind of like a termination year. It doesn't mean that you're not going to get anything, because you're going to have a grazer out there. And you can possibly, with a small grain, maybe get some yield out of it. But your focus is on termination. And you're going to use grazing and competition of another crop plant, of an annual plant, as the way to be managing it. So go out there, get it grazed off, and again, just plant the small grain. If the alfalfa starts to rear its ugly head, go out there, and even if it stresses that small grain too much, go out there and graze it again. You're using the animal as a termination tool. Alfalfa can be an ugly thing in trying to terminate it. The other thing is, think about the physiology of the alfalfa and when might be a good time to terminate it. Don't go out there and try and terminate second-year alfalfa, because it's a happy plant and it's a strong plant. Third, fourth-year alfalfa, especially starting in the fourth year, it starts to decline on its own. And what happens, and it's a really interesting thing, but it's basically nature's way of making sure that alfalfa doesn't overrun the world, because it would. If it could, it would. Alfalfa is extremely dependent on the nitrogen fixation that happens via the rhizobium. There are a lot of legumes that can absorb nitrogen well from the soil in addition to what gets fixed. Alfalfa can't do that very well. It needs the rhizobium to do this. So what nature did so that alfalfa didn't take over the world was that in a very dense alfalfa field, after about 4 years, there is what's called a bacteriophage. And it's a virus that attacks bacteria. And it attacks the rhizobium bacteria that fixes nitrogen. So essentially, so that alfalfa can't take over the world and dominate everywhere, as the alfalfa concentration builds up to a really high level, this bacteriophage builds up to a high enough level that it will terminate the alfalfa. So you'll see people who will have to go back out there after 4 or 5 years and take the alfalfa out and then replant new alfalfa. The bacteriophage doesn't live for very long, and its population, so it's kind of like some of the plant hormones, like rye will produce, what is that called again? That keeps other grains out.
Allelopathic effect.
Allelopathic, yeah. The allelopathy. It's sort of like the allelopathic chemicals. The virus is the same. They don't last very long in the soil. So you can go back out there and replant alfalfa, but you need to wait a little bit before you do that so that bacteriophage declines. So again, I wouldn't start this on 2-year alfalfa, because that's when the alfalfa is the strongest. But if you started on 3 or 4-year alfalfa, especially 4-year alfalfa, you're going to have that greater level of advantage and return on that.
I got a question back to you, Kris. So could we take alfalfa, put it in a Johnson Sioux situation, maybe for 2 weeks, pull that liquid off that's created in that 2-week period, spray it back on the alfalfa, and terminate itself with its own?
I don't know for sure if that would be, and because it's more, because it's more of what's in the soil to get that bacteria that's there. So it's almost like you would have to use the soil as inoculum, and you don't want to do that anyway. What I'm afraid of is if you did that in the Johnson Sioux, what it would do was it would grow more microorganisms that would help the alfalfa than terminate the alfalfa. Because they don't, again, it is, the microbes don't know what's in your brain and what you want to do and how you want to have it done.
You know, there's one thing I'm going to say, and I found this out more than once the hard way. Mother Nature's going to figure you out. So if you go along and say, okay, I've got this done, I'm going to get this, and this is the way I've got it done, something's going to happen. Mother Nature's going to figure out. So that's why you always want to keep it mixed up. And I might be mistaken, I've got it in my notes, Rick, but were you the one that said go in and plant last cutting a rye late in the, or excuse me, alfalfa, right in the season, come back and plant rye, and then you take it out as a forage crop? And then what would you come back in with then? Would
Well, what I'm doing there is I'm trying to offset what Kris has been talking about. The carbon is being stripped out of the profile, and I'm trying to introduce a high carbon like a cereal rye back in at the end of the season. It grows, comes up, and then it's not a lot, but it's better than nothing. The first cutting goes away to the dairy, then they come back and still take the second, third, and fourth cuttings. Then it's just a way to get some more carbon back in. I may be fooling myself, but I feel like it's better than doing nothing. Now, I have one other question for Kris on this alfalfa, and I think this is important. Do we have to worry about bloating, alfalfa bloating the cattle if it's a pure alfalfa stand?
For the most part, no. You know, again, you want to train your cattle a little bit. So I wouldn't expose some cattle that haven't ever had alfalfa to pure alfalfa because the gut microbiome doesn't really necessarily know how to deal with that right away. So that's definitely something that you would have there. And, you know, again, it is something, if you are a little bit concerned about it, you can put some hay out there that, you know, just sort of look at how you could manage the ration if it is something. Again, too, I guess the other thing would be is the age of the cows that you're having out there, the age of the animals, because that's going to make a big difference on when they're going to be more susceptible to bloat. And I can see that you've got things to follow up on there.
I do. So we have quite a bit of experience grazing alfalfa, and I guess I have 2 points to make. The first of all is to kind of answer the question about terminating alfalfa. We had a situation 3 years ago where I had an 80-acre patch of alfalfa that had some age behind. I think it was in its 4th or 5th season, and it didn't have any mixed grass species with it, which incidentally now we plant, all of our new seeding alfalfa gets orchard grass with it, and we found that the nutrient density of the feed's better and the longevity of the crop is far better because it has that grassroot species. Okay, so what we did is on this alfalfa crop that I wanted to terminate, we cut it, I think it was a 2nd or 3rd cutting, and then we went in with a forage wheat and planted it right behind it. I mean, literally right behind once the bales were gone. And so this was like late August. This was like the last week of August, okay? And then fortunately we got some rain, and so we got a huge flush of winter wheat, and it really slowed that crop down. But the next spring, we grazed it in the winter. The next spring, the wheat came far before the alfalfa did because it's a cool season grass. So it got ahead of that alfalfa. We took that as a silage crop, and we saw very little alfalfa come back after that, very little. So we planted a full season cover in there with the intent of grazing it again in the winter, but we got dry, and it literally, we got like 1.5 tons to 2 tons of forage out of it. But we did almost completely terminate that alfalfa just by competing with it with the grass, and so it can be done. There was another, and grazing. So when we graze alfalfa, it's always in the late fall. So usually there's very little, if any, green forage left. Make sure that those animals are full. Make sure their rumen's full, that they've been fed before you introduce them to any of those. Anytime you change an animal's ration, you're at risk of upsetting the apple cart, and so especially a rumen. So you have to be able to have that animal not hungry when you get them positioned out there. rule number 2 is to have other things that they can eat, not just alfalfa. You want to maybe have a grass draw or stubble field with corn stubble or something other so they can go out and naturally create their own ration. Otherwise, you will likely have some issues, especially on younger animals. So, yep.
Can you interseed orchard grass into poor stand of alfalfa if they want it for hayfield?
Yes, yes, we've done that, but it takes rain.
Yeah.
You know, we were in the dirty 30s, the blowing deal, and at the end of they showed some soil that was blowing right outside of Sioux Falls and up by Brookings and whatever. And if he's here, I hope you comment. There was a guy sitting ahead of me, and he said, I'm not a farmer. I'm not in the industry. I'm just here to learn about what's going on. And he says, why do we let this happen? What's not stopping people from stopping this from happening? And nobody could give him an answer. I don't know if he's here or not, but he was just here to learn about soil health. And, it just kind of bothered me a little bit where, education, I just don't know how do you approach that? Because here was a guy completely away from everything, and then he's seen this, and he says, why do you let that happen? And I think we have to step up to the plate, and we kind of put pressure on we had some soil blowing up there, and we kind of put pressure on it, and they got it resolved. NRCS got it resolved, make him put a different rotation in. But I really think we need to go after that a little bit, because if it's blowing because of rotation, whatever we got to do, I think as farmers, we have to get that stopped, because it's just bad for the whole farming industry.
I just wanted to make a quick comment about education, and I really do want to compliment the South Dakota Soil Health Coalition. They do a tremendous job of education, and I was saying earlier to someone that I get the opportunity to travel a lot of different places throughout U.S. and Canada, as well as internationally, and when people ask me what resources I use, what are some of the things that I go to, and one of the things that I will point out is the YouTube channel South Dakota Soil Health Coalition has, and the information and things that you're sharing. And, again, part of it is just the quality of the information that you have and the number of producers that are interviewed and talk about their operations. And we saw some of that during the lunch break and stuff like that. And I just really wanted to put a plug out there for that type of education and keeping that type of education going. And it's always one of those things too, when I first moved up to North Dakota, like I said, my dad farms in southwestern Minnesota, and you talk about rainfall and some other things like that. And he's on the top on the Buffalo Ridge, but he's not quite at the peak of the top of the Buffalo Ridge, and so he does get blessed with I think a little more rainfall than much of South Dakota gets blessed with, than some other things like that. And when I first moved to North Dakota, it was just talking with some of these farmers and ranchers in Burleigh County and in western North Dakota and into western South Dakota on how close you guys are to the edge and how brutal the conditions are that you're in, and the fact that you do this and are making these changes and are making these moves really goes to show how much this can be done sort of anywhere. And so, Rick was kind of talking about this, that, he's got a lot of advantages that you all don't have. And again, the fact that you can do this, you really need to celebrate yourselves for that, but also use that as an education tool of saying, hey, if we can do this here, you can do this there.
Yeah, I want to add to that. I travel around a lot as well, and I'm telling you, you don't get to very many places that are like this right here. There's a few, but this is something you have to cherish. You have to thank Cindy and her team. Let's just give them a big round of applause right now. Everybody likes to talk about how progressive Indiana is and this and this and this. We do not have this. This is not like this. So cherish this and learn from this. And I just want to add another thing that Dan alluded to earlier. I totally agree, Dan. We've got to get out and we've got to get the message to a bigger audience. But we have to remember that we're not here to criticize the way they farm. Because if you do that, you might as well forget it. You'll never get them. We're here to help them. We're here to give them support. And we're here to try to answer any questions that they may have. I mean, you know, you've got some local folks here, but Kris is going to go home. I'm going to go home, and in 3 or 4 months, you're going to, you know, what did that guy from Indiana say? What is it we're going to do with our cereal rye now that it's gotten 6 feet tall? Who am I going to talk to? Well, here you've got a team to talk to, but just remember, not everybody has that. So we have to remember that it's heritage here. What they're doing is what their father did, what their grandfather did, and we have to tread lightly. Yes.
You know, this has probably already been done, but I'm going to put a plug in for the Soil Health School. It's the last week of August. It lasted about 2.5 days. It's limited. I think there's 45 people go. This year it's at Garrison, just a few miles out of town. It moves around. It was at Mitchell. It was at Roscoe, you know, but you guys, I mean, it's intense. I mean, there's Dr. Ray Ward, Dr. Dwayne Beck, Dr. Don Rakowski, Dr. Lee Breeze. In the pits, a lot of the NRCS people, tremendous help. Everything you want to know about soils, everything you want to know about anything, the chemicals coming back to cover crop plots. In school, there's schoolroom, and then you go out to the fields. So, I mean, I think Cindy said there's places to sign up or get a hold of her, because if you've got any desire to really learn a lot about soil health and what's wrong and what good soil looks like, just sign up for that school and you won't regret it.
I don't know how we're coming on time. Maybe time doesn't matter at this point. We're good. There you go. Is there a question?
I'm going to echo what you said. I've gone to 2 soil health conferences. The job they did here, I've picked up something from every one of you guys up there on the stage, and I would love to talk longer. There's a question on salinity stuff. Anthony Bryan, Kristen Weber were out at my brother and my farm in Beetle County, and we shared what we're doing with them. I said, Kristen, just come do it. She says, well, you did this without financial incentive? I said, yes, I got tired of growing nothing. And they have pictures, they shot quite a bit of video. So if you have questions on that, the resources are there. Ask the questions, there's plenty of people. You know, Roy, I really enjoyed listening to you. You are what you eat. I'm not going to go on your diet. I look at you and it's like, tremendous story, you know. Jorgensen Land and Cattle, you look at the pictures of that grass down there, phenomenal. Kris, you know, you're up here, but you communicate like you're sitting right next to us. Well done. You know, for somebody to come in and talk about organic production, you know, everybody's got an opinion on everything. I feed cattle. I do that to relax. I don't know why, but I do. That's when I have my best ideas and my worst ideas. And so kudos to the Soil Health Coalition for putting together a panel that has been so informative. I don't think I ever started on a journey, but that is what I'm on. My goal is to take care of myself. I started composting. I've told more than one person. A year ago in April, the last time I mentioned biology was when I was in high school, 40 years ago. I find it incredibly interesting. My dad gave my brother and myself the opportunity to farm. I'm trying to do the same thing with my son behind me. I'm a little bit if I can be reliant on myself and not letting the corporations make the decisions for me, I think that would make me happy. That being said, here's my question. It's always about the money. And I'm concerned about who's holding the carrot and where we're being led. Because there's some people that I've encountered in the last few years that don't like animal agriculture. There was an individual I ran into that I sat down and she says, "You're in agriculture. You're part of the problem. You'll have to admit that." And I said, "What's the problem?" She says, "Those tractors going back and forth in the field all day, putting the fumes up in the air." That gal was born and raised in South Dakota. Her grandparents lived 20 miles from where I live. And I went home from that meeting, that chance encounter, and she ended the conversation, and some of the people here have heard this, but she said, nothing will really change. She wanted to change what I did. And all I'm doing is providing food. And I'm providing food for people that really don't like what I do. And I questioned, at 56 years old, why am I doing this? What do I say to that person? How do I educate that person who does not want to have an exchange of ideas? So I come back to, the comment of the presenter yesterday about the total carbon system that's probably coming, and the payments are going to go from here up to here. I'm a little bit concerned about where politics or where the whole, and you talked we are a community. Microbiology is a community. I didn't know that a year ago. Where are we going? Who is going to make those ultimate decisions for us? And should I be concerned about it? I'm not concerned for myself. I'm concerned 2 generations down.
I have an opinion about everything. Rick asked if I have an opinion. You should know me better than that, Rick. I have an opinion about everything. Well, I think that, one, you're right to be concerned. I put up pictures. I don't have any kids of my own, but I have nieces and nephews, and 2 grandnieces and 1 grandnephew, and I'm terrified many days about what their future is going to look like in many ways. And I think that, to the person that that had this conversation, it's hard to engage when another person doesn't want to engage back with you or to be talking it through. And so sometimes when I encounter those individuals, it's like, okay, I understand, but, we all need food. Everything needs food. And I'm trying to do the best that I can. You may disagree with that on how I'm growing food and providing that food, and just kind of leave it at that and not trying to argue. If they are willing to engage, talking a lot about what it is that you're doing and the life that you are seeing as you are walking through your pastures, and talking about how that exists. I've had many people come up to me and engage about cattle in particular, because cattle get targeted a lot for a variety of reasons. Depending on the individual, and sometimes I like to use humor for a variety of reasons. And one of the things that I'll do is I'll be just like, "Did you pass gas today?" Because, every animal that's got a microbial gut is going to be passing gas. So we've got to recognize, and just kind of doing those things to sort of, this is where we are in a common place, but this is what it is that we're trying to do. And when it comes to some of the things with the carbon markets, part of the work that I do is trying to look at how we can measure and monitor carbon, and we have lots of debates within the group that I work with on, should we do some carbon marketing? How would we go about doing that? What would that look like? All of those types of things. And I think in the end, for me, a lot of times with farmers and ranchers, it is more about saying, I want to regenerate my soil and grow carbon in my soil and get more organic matter in my soil. And this is not about me getting carbon credits or those types of things. I'm always, again, if there's a dumb schmuck that wants to pay me for it, take the money and run. Talked about farmers and ranchers, stubborn and stupid and independent but God love you, and you're, Renaissance people, and you do so many different jobs and do it all well and do it with humility and grace. And, that's not something that most people can repeat and engage in. And so a lot of times for me, when I get stuck in those conversations and I can't get out of them, it's just, I have to take what I have within my own self and feel good about it. And, I'm doing this for the health of my soil. And as I said, for my nieces and nephews and my grandnieces and my grandnephew. And I love my dad, but I've kind of given up on him as far as some things are concerned. I know after this, to be honest, again, it's like going to Burley County and see, after this, he's going to do some stuff. I know he will, because that's what happens. Don't listen to Farmer's Daughter, but you listen to all of you guys. So thank you very much for doing that for him.
Thank you for the kind words you gave to the panel. I appreciate that. One thing I'd like to do is sometimes present the question back to that person, okay, then what's your plan? Because a lot of times these people that are a negative and against you don't have any idea on how to fix the problem. They just want to voice what they think is the problem.
When we were there, we would ask, it was when COVID was blowing up in the Smithfield plant in Sioux Falls here. And my brother-in-law and I, we would ask a question, how, and I never ever got an answer. And I'm sitting there, it's like, I'm the minority, because I'm having that conversation with one of our own in South Dakota. You go to the coast, and you have to do this. You have to do this. And like with the sequestering of that carbon pipeline, and I'm sitting there thinking, okay, we're going to build this carbon pipeline. The only way it's workable is with subsidy, so we can sell to a market that has already passed a law that say they don't want an internal combustion engine. I struggle with that. Why would we do this? And then I come back and it's like, I had a truck driver at my place, and I said, you need to shut the trucks off. He says, for 2 weeks. He says, no, you do it in 3 days. He says, and I said, why don't we stop at the border? Prove to me your system will work. And that's where I get stuck. But I'm not an advocate for, but what do we do? Because I'm the minority. Why am I working till 8, 10 o'clock at night to, in essence, feed people that don't like what I do?
But I don't have all the answers for you. I think you've done it very eloquently as well. But you also have to remember that there's a certain group of people we will never reach. So that's okay. Let those people do their thing. Let's focus on the positive and how much can we take this group even further. And that's how I kind of look at it. So I don't mean to, believe me, I get into your conversation you're talking about all the time. So I tend to just get a little thick-skinned sometimes, and I just typically present right back to them, okay, if you don't like what I'm doing, then present to me what you would do to solve the problem. And they usually don't have any response.
Okay, we got some more questions here.
After seeing Dan's family's combine going on an angle, my question is, can you plant your cover crop a different angle from the way you're going to plant your cash crop? Would you be able to get a better cover on the ground when you crimp it?
Yeah, that if we're going to plant, all our covers go on winter wheat. Because that's their only time frame and their limited moisture. So we're combining at 7% angle, and then usually what we'll do is we'll just take a little slight angle the other way when we plant our cover, and then come back and plant our corn back and forth. But it doesn't really, we don't really cut the, it's just, we only use 2 ranks when we do our cover crop. We don't really disturb the straw that much, and that's our goal. But one thing we've got to start doing, when you get a wet year, we'll put covers on a lot of our winter wheat. There's a lot of winter wheat that's 18, 19 miles away from home, 20 miles away from home. And, you know, we haven't got to where we can get the fences and the cattle and the water there. So, but we do anything within a 10-mile radius of the home will graze. And Bryan, you might have something to say on that, huh?
As far as being able to plant in those conditions, is that kind of the question?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. As far as, because I know you crimp the way you plant, but I didn't know if you could seed your cover crop on a different angle, and when it's laid down, maybe get a little better cover, yay or nay?
Yeah, generally we plant almost everything at a slight offset from 0 to 90. So unless it's a row crop, you know, like corn, it's always going to be a 0 or a 90.
Right.
Generally speaking, the cover crops will always be a little bit inverted away from that. So you're always crossing rows.
Okay.
We do not use stripper heads. I don't have anything against them. We ran them for 15 years. We were one of the first in the area to have them and loved them. The problem we had with them was more economically driven. These larger machines, you're really not utilizing the capacity of them. If you need that machine to run a 35 or 40 foot flex head for beans or milo or a 12-row corn head, you don't need that big a combine with a stripper head. So you know, it was kind of wasting power. The other problem is you've got $100 and some $1,000 head you can use for cereal grains. You can't use it on soybeans effectively. It's not going to work on milo. It's not going to work on corn. So you would effectively have to have $300,000 heads, which I have a hard time with that when you have 2 or 3 combines. So the other problem we were having with the strippers is in the morning times when we were trying to plant corn in the stripped, you know, we were just fighting it, because there's always going to be dew, and there's always going to be a restriction of how that straw flowed around those row cleaners and so forth. It was very, very frustrating. So when we went to the flex draper heads and the ability of the combines now to effectively control their straw, frankly, I don't miss the stripper heads. The only time I miss them is being able to catch the snow. That's where I miss them. But we're getting a lot more residue on that surface, or a lot more armor on that surface a lot quicker. So generally, though, we don't have much trouble planting into that now. And then if you couple that with the addition of a cover crop, a lot of that residue is going to become a mat. It's not going to be standing. It's just going to become a mat through the winter time. So we have eliminated our planting issues completely. We can get up, we can start it before sun up and just go, never stop.
You know, we're just like Bryan. The main reason we want is snow catch. You know, one thing that's really interesting, you guys, and that we found, and we had one neighbor with stripper head stubble, and his stubble actually blew in the fence line. And you go out there and it's rootless wheat, you pull it up and there's no roots on it. And like right now, we haven't seen that yet on ours. Once in a while, but not very much. So you know what's happening, you know what's eating the roots. That's why it's rootless wheat. But you know, the one thing, and when we didn't run strippers, we've been running them for 9 years now. We run our old flexes, and they're not worth very much money right now. We wish we had drapers, but our beans aren't a big player. But one thing we do with the strippers is we go at an angle the first time, and then when we didn't have a stripper, what we'd do is we'd pull the knives out. Wouldn't use the knives at all because we didn't want to cut that straw up at all. We wanted it to break down as slow as it could. Do we have trouble with wet mornings? We do. I mean, it's one of them deals we work with. We think it's the payoff. Craig's been in some tremendously tough, that picture, I wish it would have been motion. Unreal the amount of stuff he goes through, but it all seems to work. We've got pneumatic trash whips. Is it perfect? Are we going to get that many acres? We'll plant about 2,700 acres of corn a year, so it's not like it's just like a quarter or two, but there's a lot of people in our area have gone away from strippers because of that. But then immediately, like this last year, and it was so dry, they came back to strippers, and we just say we're committed to stripper heads. So right or wrong, and I understand Bryan's deal too, because of them flex heads with the draper heads are nice. So, but it's just what we're committed to.
I just wanted to make a comment or bring up another point of discussion, kind of leading to the discussion earlier about the young gal that said farmers are the problem. I worked with John Deere for a number of years, and I got a lot of propaganda that said, you know, everything we do, all the money that we're charging producers and our efficiencies that we're trying to get out of every acre is to feed the world. But if we look into that, our major crops, corn and soybeans, the majority are not going to food. The majority are now going to industrial products. And I think that's an important thing for us to realize as farmers, is where the end stream is and how, as I got to earlier with the subsidies, how subsidized those industries are and how that affects our commodity prices and our land values, and how to create less reliance. How can we get back to producing food instead of high fructose corn syrup, or, you know, soybeans are used in plastic and road treatments. So this whole argument about we can't change our farming practices because the world will starve is a lie. It's propagated by these corporations that want to maintain the status quo. So any thoughts on that? Did you guys agree with that?
Because I have an opinion on everything, I'll have an opinion again on this. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, publishes educational material, and you can find educational material that they will give you that will tell you that we need to increase our food production by, I think, about 43% in order to be able to continue to feed our growing population. And they will also have a publication on, again, in their publication information, that will say that we can currently feed over 15 billion people. So it is a thing in which there are a lot of issues with how people are getting fed, and you know, we do have people starving in the United States and people starving other places in the world. You know, we can talk about all of the issues that are causing that, infrastructure, food waste, all of these types of things. In do we really need to grow more food? I agree with you, and as I've said, I currently live in Canada. There are a lot of reasons why I live in Canada, and one of the reasons why I moved up to Canada in conjunction with this is that I was really frustrated with the United States, for the most part, having an infrastructure that was determined to make us the global suppliers of low quality feed and industrial products. And unfortunately, industrial products, and you know, I like making plastics out of plant material. I like all of those things that we're doing. But the reality is those industrial products can be made far more efficiently and far more effectively utilizing microbes, microalgae, and other microbes to be able to do that at a much greater scale, much cheaper, and still being biodegradable and addressing those issues you're trying to address. So from that standpoint, the fact that, you know, we're determined to be the global suppliers of industrial products and low quality feed, we're going to end up being the suppliers of low quality feed. Now, we have exceptions with some of the farmers, but this also, I'm going to get on my sort of political soapbox probably a little bit. This also is one of the things where I think we have to continue to work really, really hard to try and get this to change. Because again, in Canada, it's far easier to grow a diverse crop rotation when you're talking to a farmer about regenerative agriculture, and you can grow quinoa and peas and lentils and faba beans and you know, wheat and oats and corn and soybeans are kind of further down on the list. Obviously, there's a little bit of a difference if you're in eastern Canada and parts of Ontario than most of the agricultural region of Canada is in the plains in Saskatchewan and Manitoba and Alberta. But they can grow all of these diverse crops, and they can market all of these diverse crops and market them very, very easily. There's not that impediment to the farmers in growing the diverse crops that there is in the United States. I worked with an organic farmer in Wisconsin, and he and some of the other organic farmers that he worked with in Wisconsin, they bought a cargo container because it was cheaper and easier for them to load their organic grains onto a cargo container and ship that overseas via the Great Lakes than it was to be able to ship that within the United States. Because again, there wasn't enough trucks that could be on the road. There isn't enough infrastructure to do this, and this is where my political soapbox is Cargill and ADM and ConAgra control railroad spurs and what can be taken in an elevator. You want to grow something diverse, you either got to market it directly, so you're not going to grow it at scale, or you got to ship it, and you're going to lose whatever value you got from having that diversity, other than the value that it gave to your soil health. You can lose that value in having to ship it. And again, if we do this at scale, I said, there's 900 million acres in agriculture, and we're not making enough of a dent. If we made enough of a dent, how would we really be able to ship all of this diversity that we're doing? I've been on an advisory board with General Mills. I was on an advisory board with General Mills. I'm on an advisory board with McCain's. They're mostly into potatoes. And the one thing that I keep telling them is what they need to do to make a difference is not just focus on their commodity that they're looking at, but they need to focus on every other potential commodity that would be grown as part of the rotation. You talk to potato growers need to be talking to barley growers and need to be talking to the barley industry, and they need to be talking to the pea industry. And, all of these things need to be working together in order for us to be able to really do this at scale. Again, I go back to my dad. My dad has tried to grow oats, and he's tried to grow wheat, and he tried to grow sunflowers again. He used to do this all when I was a kid. When he first had the farm, we grew flax and oats and wheat and alfalfa and sunflowers and all of these other types of things. And now he primarily grows corn, soybeans. And, again, if you've got to ship something over 200 miles to get it to wherever you're delivering it, it's impossible for us to be able to do that. And so we need to be working with the industry as a whole to see how it is that we can change that, whether that comes from government policy or that comes from industry. Somewhere in some way that has to change. And Roy was talking about, this restaurateur who wants to get food locally. I don't know how he's going to get enough food for 3 restaurants. I don't even know how you get enough food for 1 restaurant. We live on some of the best land on the planet, and we grow industrial products and low-grade feed. And I don't mean to, again, I'm an equal opportunity offender. I do this, I know myself. We should be ashamed of ourselves. And we can change that. You can change that. You're a young man. I know you can.
Yeah, I would agree with Kris, and I think... I
can't follow that up.
I can't either. I just thought I'd start talking and see where it went. No, there's a lot of good points, but I think keeping the... as far as the restaurant owner, there's a processing plant that's it's in investment phase right now, but it's got plans up by Falkton to be built. It's going to be a larger facility, do I think 25 head a day. The Hendricks, I don't know if anybody knows them, are kind of doing it. They're heading it up. That's exciting for cattle operators, and gives a good opportunity. Now this guy at the restaurant told me how many cattle he goes through in a year, and I would agree with Kris. That's a lot of product to get down to Sioux Falls from South Dakota. And he's one guy, and he's starting to talk to the other restaurant owners in Sioux Falls, and they're all starting to do it. And I should say they're all starting to do it. A lot of the people are really trying to do more local stuff. And so I think as producers, it starts with one desire to change your operation to be direct marketed, and whatever hurdles you got to do to get there, I think is worth the blood, sweat, and tears to make it happen, because I think it's going to be better for everybody. I think the food quality will be better for the people eating at these restaurants. Keeping the dollars in South Dakota is very exciting to think of. And he just met with Cisco, his sales rep for Cisco, and this guy was trying to get all these bundles in shape for him to buy from them again, because during COVID he got so frustrated they dropped off bad meat and made him take it, and he wasn't going to feed that to his customers. And so he's really frustrated with that. And in our conversation, he was saying he wants to spread the word of what he's doing, and he's gotten a lot of his meat from South Dakota already, some from Nebraska, some from Minnesota. And his veggies in Minnesota, locally, just not 20 miles away. A lot of his peppers, carrots, things like that. And so especially for smaller operators, I think I had one person say, well, we only have a small acreage. Well, that's okay, because you can start with someone like this guy would love to buy your carrots or your peppers. Start there and just start growing from Stacking Enterprises. But there's lots of opportunity for that. And yeah, there will be some hurdles, but I think it's going to be better for everybody. We can control the quality of our food when we're selling to somebody who really likes your product. You can control, no matter if it's grass-fed or whether it's corn-fed or however you finish your animals. He's able to tell his customers there, this came from a ranch up by Fulton, and that burger you're eating came from one animal. It's not 25 different pieces of animals shoved together that you would get at McDonald's or something like that. And so it's really exciting that even the restaurant owners are understanding people want to know where their food comes from. So I think there's great opportunity, and there will be some hurdles to get there, but I think we'll figure out how to do it.
If I could just add really quick too, I was just with Jay Fear actually up in Canada, and he was talking because the Walmart there in Bismarck, one of the Walmarts there in Bismarck, put up a big sign, a big display, locally grown produce, and it was a couple weeks ago. So, this is Bismarck, North Dakota. There's not a whole lot of locally grown produce right now that's happening in Bismarck, North Dakota. So Jay being Jay, I don't know if some of you probably met Jay. Jay being Jay, found the manager of the Walmart and was, well, where does your local produce come from? Just out of curiosity. And the guy was like, well, local is kind of defined as planet Earth. and so we need to be a little bit more cautious as to when it is that we're looking and thinking about sourcing goods and thinking about, we all talk about this of eating seasonally and all of these other things, and working with restaurateurs to be able to provide food on a seasonal basis, and how we can be doing this stuff. Because to a corporation, local could have a pretty big definition. It was sort of, what he said was basically local was wherever they could get it from. But that was kind of,
it's probably local to one of the Walmarts somewhere in the U.S.
Somewhere in the U.S., yeah.
But to finish one of my points I forgot about was he was saying that this restaurant owner was saying that the Cisco rep was basically trying to bundle all these things together so he'd do business again with them. And I said, wow, sounds kind of like a seed and chemical rep too. When you kind of start going this regenerative path, they come and they're like, well, you used to buy this much fertilizer. Are you going somewhere else? Or you kind of explain what you're doing. And I had a guy riding the combine with me this fall for a while and talking about their different traded corns. And I told him what my desires were, and I was fine to have him along, but unfortunately I don't think it was a success for him, but I was just able to share what we were doing and why we were doing it and stuff. And I think just doing your job and letting the joy of what you're doing, knowing it's the right thing for your operation, satisfy that need for, the purpose of why we do what we do, and just really dig up the soil and see the change. And that should be a lot to keep us going in the right direction.
Excellent, excellent questions and great responses. Thank you all for your insight. I think we've got time, and I would value any maybe 1 minute closing comments from each of you panelists to the group before we invite the board to do a wrap-up session.
Yeah, I just want to just say thank you for all of you here that took time the last 2 days to sit and learn and listen and share. That is so incredibly important. You're a very small percentile of a small percentile, but you're the seeds that will get planted that will increase every year and get bigger and better. So, take what you've learned, take it back, try a little bit. You're going to make mistakes. Don't be afraid of that. That's how you learn. It just takes time. But don't be afraid to make mistakes. That's the biggest, that's the hardest thing for us as humans is we don't want to make mistakes. We want to be perfect. Well, that's just not reality. But be afraid to take some chances, make some mistakes. That's how you learn, and you're going to grow for it. And don't worry about what the coffee shop talk is. Just forget about that. Those guys, I'm telling you, what a bunch of puds. They're going to sit there. They're going to complain. They're victims. Don't be a victim. All right? Those guys are victims because they're going to sit there and complain about everything in life, but they're never going to do anything to make it better. So don't worry about what they're saying.
Right, exactly. Yeah, in fact, be encouraged by the coffee table talk because you're giving them a lot to talk about. So, but I grew lentils one time, and I remember I had a neighbor come and tell me, man, do lentils only ever get about this tall? I said, I don't know. It's my first year growing them. They said, well, I said, how'd you know how tall they were? They said, well, they're at the coffee table this morning. Somebody had gone and dug them up. But he's absolutely right. You know what? My mom always told me, actions speak louder than words. And I always say, I'm sorry for talking back or whatever. Actions speak louder than words. And I feel like that's kind of what we need to remember too, is that we do our thing and just do it if it makes sense to you. And like you said, don't worry about it, but just let your actions show that you really don't care too much about what they have to say. You respect them, but what they have to say doesn't really matter.
So I'm gonna go ditto and ditto. And I again want to thank you all for being here and staying here this afternoon and listening to me for 2 days and letting me have opinions. And that's one of the things that I guess I would encourage everyone to be doing is always asking questions and always asking why, and continue as the questions and wonderment that can be opened to your eyes by just continuing to ask questions, and don't let your fear or the fact that you have questions or anything like that stop you from doing what it is that that you want to do to be able to regenerate soil. And just wish you all the best of luck. And despite what I said about being an equal opportunity offender, and I apologize if I offended and who I offended, but I do it out of love, and I do it out of the fact that you guys do an incredible job and do something that I can't do. My dad already knows this. I'm not taking over the farm. So, I know it's a job that I can't do. So I appreciate tremendously that you do this job and really value you. So please make sure that you value yourselves.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to follow this. Like I said, I travel a lot. I'm from a climate that gets 34 inches of rain. It may not be at the right time, when you want it, but it is still about 34 inches, which is a lot. I always applaud when I come to arid environments, and this is borderline arid. You folks are the heroes, because I don't know how you can function with 10 inches of rain. I don't know how you do that. So I applaud you for that. I thank you. I get just as much out of coming to places like this as you do coming to listen to us, because I learn how you do it here. And that really makes me sharp and helps me grow. And you need to be growing every day. The last thing I want to say is I don't know where you are on the journey, but just always remember, please do not jeopardize the livelihood of your farm. Try these ideas, as crazy as they may sound, small scale, get comfortable, and then once you get comfortable with what you're doing, then start to move into a little more diversity, a little more complexity. But I think that as you continue down this journey, I know it's a cliche, but you're going to say, why didn't I do this 10 years ago? I firmly believe that everyone eventually says that, because this is the way to farm. This is only the way to farm.
You know, I want to echo what he said too about how start on a small scale, and no matter where you're at, if you're just thinking about no-tilling, good for you. There's 5 things you should do. If you can do one of them, if you can do 2 of them, that's the start on your journey. And then another thing, you guys, and I learned that a long time ago, start on a small scale, because it's a lot easier taking a hit on 10 acres than it is 160. Another thing, just like your question on the shell-borne headers, there's a network here. So the Soil Health Coalition has that network, that app. Use that. They have a lot of meetings, and they will get more meetings. So if one individual thinks, boy, I'd like to talk about this, I'd like to get a group of people together, get a hold of one of the directors or Cindy, and they'll set up a meeting for you in your area. Get some people in from the college or NRCS or some of the directors to help you. But there's a lot of resources in this Soil Health Coalition. But you know, I really appreciate all you guys, and you've been a good crowd. I mean, I just can't believe that this many people hung around. But I mean, but anyway, really thank you guys for being here.
Yes, absolutely. A round of applause. Thank you, Bryan, Roy, Kris, Rick, and Dan, for your time and your expertise. I'm really glad this stuff is recorded, because I'm going to need it, and I think a lot of us will too. I'm going to pass off to any of the directors who might want to contribute to wrap up. But before I do, good job plugging the new Growing Connections app, Dan. If you haven't already done so, download it. It only came live for public use just a few weeks ago, so this is brand new. All of you are here. You're charged up. You're going to go home and think, dang, they ran out of time, or I forgot to ask that question. Use the app. You can do the survey if you haven't already done so. And if you do not like smartphones or don't download apps or whatever, you can also utilize that just on the regular website. And then let's not forget, yes, we've got the 5 or 6 soil health principles, but cropped land is a converted land. It started here in the eastern part of the state anyhow. Tallgrass prairie like is on that banner. There's so much more below ground than there is above ground, and whatever we can do to mimic that in our decision making and our agricultural operations, I think is a motion towards restored and regenerated soils.
Okay, just a final couple thoughts here. Again, thank you to our sponsors for making this event possible. They come together to provide this type of environment and education for you guys. We could not do it without them. And thank you for your attendance. It was great to see a room full of people the last two days. Please fill out the surveys. It gives us direction for next year. We always want to try and make it bigger and better, so your opinion matters.
Yep, I just want to echo, if you do business with them or see any of the people that work for any of these sponsors, thank them for helping sponsor this event and letting us get good speakers here. And thanks for being very attentive, being interactive. It makes it really fun to put this on when everybody can get together and share ideas. And hopefully we can see most of you in Rapid City next year.